I am Rachel Morgan, 34, and I never expected to walk into my own home and feel like a stranger. After cutting my Zurich business trip short, I returned to find 88 people partying in my house. My mother, Beverly, stood in my kitchen wearing an apron, directing caterers. My brother Ethan was bartending at my grandfather Maxwell's antique bar. A family reunion in full swing that I knew nothing about. In the house my grandfather left specifically to me. If you're watching this from a family gathering, I hope yours is more welcoming than mine was. Drop a comment about your family reunion experiences and subscribe to follow what happened after I made the decision that changed everything. I built my career the hard way. While most of my college friends were partying, I was coding until 3 a.m, developing the skills that would eventually land me a position at Next Gen Solutions. I started as a junior software engineer in a cubicle so small I could touch both walls with my outstretched arms. For 7 years, I worked 80-hour weeks, surviving on instant ramen and determination. When others complained about demanding clients or impossible deadlines, I put my head down and found solutions. That dedication didn't go unnoticed. By 30, I was leading my own development team. By 32, I became the youngest executive director in the company's history. My grandfather Maxwell was my biggest supporter throughout this journey. He was an engineer himself, old school, worked with his hands building bridges across the country. He understood dedication and craftsmanship. When I was 12, he gave me my first computer while my mother, Beverly, rolled her eyes. "She should be outside playing with other kids," she'd say. But Grandpa Maxwell would wink at me and whisper, "Some build with steel, others with code." Both changed the world. Every Sunday through high school, I'd visit him at the old Victorian house that had been in our family for 3 generations. While my mother and brother skipped these visits, I'd sit with Grandpa in his study as he taught me about structural integrity, mathematical principles, and most importantly, personal integrity. "A Morgan never cuts corners," he'd say, pointing to the intricate woodwork of his antique desk. The person who made this desk took pride in their work, even the parts no one would ever see. That's the mark of someone worth trusting. My brother Ethan took a different path. 3 years younger, he always had that natural charisma that made people want to give him things. Where I worked for my achievements, Ethan expected them. He started and dropped out of 4 different college programs, each time convincing our mother that he'd found his true calling. Each new venture required startup money, which Beverly always provided from her teacher's salary, stretching herself thin financially. When Grandpa Maxwell passed away 2 years ago, his will shocked everyone but me. The family home, a historic Victorian in a now trendy neighborhood of Boston worth nearly $2 million, was left solely to me. His note in the will was simple: to Rachel, who understands the value of building something to last. My mother was livid. "He must have been confused at the end," she insisted. "That house was meant for the whole family." She expected me to sign it over or at least sell it and split the proceeds with her and Ethan. But I couldn't do that. The house wasn't just wood and plaster to me. It was every Sunday afternoon lesson, every proud smile when I shared my accomplishments, every quiet moment in the library reading books from his collection. I moved in immediately, lovingly restoring rooms while preserving their historic character. I converted the library into my home office, but kept Grandpa's books and his antique desk. I replanted his garden according to his meticulous notes, bringing back the heirloom roses he'd cultivated for decades. Despite the inheritance tension, I tried maintaining a relationship with my mother and brother. I invited them for holiday dinners, which they attended with an air of being visitors rather than family. I offered to help Ethan with his latest business scheme, a food truck concept, with business planning rather than cash, which he declined. I even offered to help my mother with her mortgage, which she accepted but mentioned at every opportunity as if it were a loan I was collecting interest on rather than a gift. The Zurich trip was a major career milestone. NextGen had been trying to land Helvetica Banking Systems as a client for years. As our new international accounts director, landing this contract would cement my reputation and open European markets to our company. After 2 grueling weeks of presentations, negotiations, and very little sleep, I secured a 3-year contract worth millions. The team wanted to celebrate in Zurich for the weekend, but I was homesick. I wanted to celebrate in my own way, a quiet evening in my garden with a glass of good wine, reflecting on how far I'd come. I booked an early flight, not telling anyone I was returning 2 days ahead of schedule. It would be my private victory lap. During the flight home, I scrolled through photos of my garden on my phone. The spring tulips would be at their peak now. I'd planted them in a pattern Grandpa had designed years ago that spelled out "Onward" when viewed from the upstairs window, his favorite motto. I thought about the bottle of Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. This certainly qualified. The Uber turned onto my street, and I felt that familiar warmth of coming home after a long trip. That feeling lasted exactly 12 seconds until I saw the cars. They were everywhere, parked on both sides of the street, partly on my lawn, blocking my driveway. The bass of music thumped through my usually quiet neighborhood. My driver had to stop half a block away. "Looks like some party," he commented as he helped me with my luggage. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at my house, trying to make sense of the scene before me. Lights blazed from every window. Shadows of people moved inside. Laughter and conversations spilled out onto my carefully tended garden, where strangers now stood in clusters, plastic cups in hand, cigarettes dropping ash onto my flower beds. What was happening? Had my house been taken over? I took a deep breath and wheeled my suitcase up the path to my own front door, a sense of dread growing with each step. The walk from the street to my front door felt surreal. My garden, which I had spent countless weekends perfecting, was now a trampled mess. The tulips Grandpa and I had planned were crushed under careless feet. Cigarette butts dotted the lawn like toxic confetti. Someone had moved my hand-carved teak garden chairs to form a makeshift smoking area, and rings from sweating beer bottles now stained the wood. A group of middle-aged men I'd never seen before stood near my koi pond, and one was attempting to toss coins into it for luck. I wanted to tell him that copper is toxic to fish, but I was too stunned to speak. Children chased each other around the yard, one dangerously close to knocking over the stone lantern that had been imported from Japan by my grandfather in the 1970s. No one stopped me or questioned my presence as I approached my own home. Why would they? I was just another face in a sea of strangers. The front door was propped open with a potted plant that had been moved from my sunroom. I stepped inside and the sensory assault was immediate. The smell hit me first, a mixture of various perfumes, cooking odors, and spilled alcohol. The sound was overwhelming, dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, music playing from my living room sound system, children shrieking as they ran up and down my stairs. The temperature was stifling with so many bodies in a space meant for far fewer people. My foyer, normally a calm space with a simple antique console table and a mirror, was cluttered with purses, jackets, and gift bags. A banner hung across the archway leading to the living room. Morgan Family Reunion 2025, bringing the generations together. Someone had set up a folding table with name tags and a guest book. I moved through my home in a daze, recognizing distant relatives I hadn't seen in years mingled with faces completely unknown to me. My great-aunt Mabel, who I thought lived in Arizona, was sitting in my reading nook with several elderly women. Cousins I vaguely remembered from childhood summers were clustered around my dining table, which had been extended with rental tables to accommodate what looked like a buffet spread. I spotted my mother in the kitchen, wearing an apron and directing 2 women who appeared to be catering staff. She was pointing to my pantry, telling them where to find more serving platters. Beverly was 62 but looked younger, her hair freshly highlighted and styled, wearing a dress I'd never seen before with a corsage pinned to it. When she turned and saw me, there was no joy in her expression, no surprise moment. Instead, she looked annoyed, her smile faltering. "Rachel, what are you doing here? I thought you were in Europe until Sunday. Not welcome home, or we missed you." Just irritation at my unexpected appearance at my own house. "I live here, Mom," I said, still struggling to process the scene. "What is all this?" "It's the family reunion," she said as if it were obvious. "We've been planning it for months." "Planning what in my house?" "Without telling me." She waved dismissively. "We knew you were busy with work. Besides, you're always saying we should use the house more, that it's too big for just you." That wasn't true. I'd never said anything remotely like that. In fact, I'd been clear about my boundaries regarding the house, especially after Ethan had once shown up with friends for an impromptu pool party while I was at work. Before I could respond, my brother appeared, carrying a tray of empty glasses. At 31, Ethan still had the same boyish charm that had gotten him out of trouble throughout childhood. He wore a blue button-down with Morgan Family Reunion host embroidered on the pocket. "Oh, you're back early," he said casually. "Surprise." The afterthought lacked any genuine enthusiasm. "How did you even get in?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Mom had the spare key you gave her for emergencies," Ethan replied with a shrug. "Don't worry, everything's under control. We hired cleaners for tomorrow." I looked around at my home, transformed without my knowledge or consent into a venue for people who were largely strangers to me. I noticed scratches on my hardwood floors from moved furniture. Someone had rearranged my living room to accommodate more seating, pushing my grandmother's antique secretary desk against the wall where it now had a cluster of wine glasses sitting on its surface, leaving rings on the 19th century wood. A tall, older man approached me with a curious expression. "You look familiar. Are you from Mabel's side or Richard's side?" "I'm Rachel Morgan. This is my house," I said flatly. His eyes widened slightly. "Oh, you're Maxwell's granddaughter? The one who got the house?" The way he said "got the house" made it sound like I'd won a game show prize rather than inherited my grandfather's home that I'd spent countless hours in throughout my life. "Yes, I own this house," I clarified. "Well, it's nice of you to host everyone. Beautiful place. Should have been divided among the family, though, if you ask me." A lot of people were surprised by Maxwell's decision. He wandered off before I could respond, leaving me seething. I moved through the crowd, hearing snippets of similar conversations. "Never see her at family functions anyway. Spends all her time working. Doesn't even know half the family. What would she do with all this space?" I spotted family photos displayed that had been taken from my storage boxes in the attic. Cousins were looking through my grandfather's record collection. Someone had moved my laptop from my office to make space for a dessert table. My private space had been completely violated. In the dining room, I discovered a stack of custom t-shirts with Morgan Family Reunion 2025 printed on them, along with a date 3 weeks ago. This wasn't a spontaneous gathering. This had been planned well in advance. Without me, my head was spinning. I needed air. I stepped out onto the back porch, only to find it occupied by teenagers I didn't recognize, scrolling on their phones and complaining about being dragged to a lame family thing. I walked back through the house, past my mother who was now posing for photos with people introduced as second cousins from Chicago, past Ethan who was mixing drinks and soaking up attention from female relatives, past great-uncle someone and first cousin once removed whoever. No one noticed as I picked up my suitcase, still sitting in the foyer where I'd left it. No one called after me as I walked out the front door. I made it halfway down the block before tears blurred my vision. I pulled out my phone and booked a room at the Marriott downtown. I couldn't stay and make a scene. I couldn't pretend this was okay. I needed space to think. As the Uber pulled away, I looked back at my grandfather's house, my house, glowing with light and life. Filled with people who didn't know me, didn't respect me, and apparently didn't miss me when I wasn't included in family events. The betrayal cut deep. But it was the disrespect to my grandfather's wishes and my personal space that hurt most of all. I checked into the hotel in a daze, dropped my suitcase by the generic desk, and sat on the edge of the bed. The quiet of the room was a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just left. I picked up my phone and stared at the screen, wondering who to call, what to do next, and how I'd ever look at my home the same way again. The hotel room felt sterile and impersonal, but at least it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed for nearly an hour, my mind replaying the events of the evening like a bad movie I couldn't turn off. This wasn't the first time my mother and brother had dismissed my feelings, but it was certainly the most flagrant. As the initial shock wore off, memories surfaced from throughout my life, a pattern I'd normalized but now saw clearly. My 8th birthday party, where my mother invited the entire class but forgot to order a cake that I wasn't allergic to. Oh, Rachel, don't make a fuss. The other children are enjoying themselves. My high school graduation, where they arrived late and left early for Ethan's baseball game. It's the semifinals, Rachel. You just walk across a stage. We'll see the photos. The biggest one when I received a prestigious engineering scholarship and my mother responded by asking if I'd considered something more feminine instead. Meanwhile, Ethan's mediocre grades were celebrated, his abandoned hobbies funded, his irresponsibility framed as finding himself. I called my best friend Hannah at midnight, not caring about the late hour. Hannah had witnessed my family dynamics for over 20 years and never minced words about them. They did what? She exclaimed after I explained the situation. In your house? Without even telling you? Oh, hell no, Rachel. That's beyond disrespectful. Am I overreacting? I asked, suddenly doubting myself as I'd been conditioned to do. Overreacting? If anything. You're underreacting. They invaded your personal space, used your property without permission, and didn't even invite you to a family event in your own home. That's not normal, Rachel. That's not okay. Hannah's validation helped solidify what I already knew. This wasn't about a party. This was about a fundamental lack of respect that had characterized my relationship with my mother and brother for decades. I'd set boundaries they consistently ignored. I'd offered olive branches they took for granted. I'd made excuses for their behavior that they never had to make for themselves. I barely slept that night, my mind running through options. Confront them? They'd minimize it. Request an apology? They'd give a hollow one to appease me until next time. Try to explain my feelings? They'd make me feel oversensitive. Morning came, and with it, resolve. I returned to my house at 9 a.m., expecting most guests would be gone. I was right about the guests, but wrong about the state of my home. The scene was worse than I imagined. Empty bottles and glasses littered every surface. Food had been ground into my Persian rugs. Someone had been sick in my powder room sink. Rental chairs were stacked haphazardly in my living room. My garden looked like a tornado had hit it. My mother was in the kitchen, drinking coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered. There you are. Where did you disappear to last night? So dramatic, Rachel. No apology. No acknowledgement of the violation. Just criticism of my reaction. I stayed at a hotel since my bedroom was apparently being used as a coat check room, I replied, struggling to keep my voice even. Oh, that was Ethan's idea. We needed the space. You know how these things go. The cleaning crew will be here at noon. That's not the point, Mom. You used my house without asking me. You didn't even tell me about a family reunion, let alone invite me to it. She sighed as if I were being unreasonable. You're always working anyway. Would you even have come? Besides, you're so particular about everything. If we'd asked, you would have had a million conditions. Yes, I would have had conditions about the use of my personal property. That's normal. Ethan emerged from the guest room, hair disheveled, wearing yesterday's clothes. Morning, he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee. Great party, right? Everyone loved the house. "Ethan, why didn't you tell me about this reunion?" I asked directly. He shrugged. "We needed a big place, and you have all this space." Seemed obvious. What's the big deal? We're family. The big deal is that this is my home, not a public venue. You can't just decide to use it without my permission. Technically, it's the family home, my mother interjected. Your grandfather would have wanted everyone to enjoy it. That was the match that lit the fuse. Don't you dare tell me what my grandfather would have wanted. He specifically left this house to me because he knew I would respect and care for it. I walked away from them, needing to assess the damage throughout the house. What I found sent me from angry to livid. In the study, my grandfather's antique mahogany desk, the one he'd shown me as an example of craftsmanship and integrity, had a deep scratch across its surface and what looked like a burn mark from a cigarette. Despite my strict no-smoking policy indoors, the desk wasn't just furniture. It was where he'd taught me to draft, where he'd written letters of recommendation for my college applications, where he'd penned his final will. I continued to my home office and found the door ajar, a room I always kept locked. Someone had picked or forced the lock. Inside, drawers were open. Work documents had been moved. My laptop had been relocated. The framed first dollar I'd earned freelancing in college had been taken off the wall, the frame cracked. Upstairs was no better. My bedroom door had been opened despite the clear private, please keep closed sign. My closet was ajar, dresser drawers not fully closed. Someone had been in my personal space, touched my things. I returned downstairs to find my mother and brother in casual conversation about someone named Cousin Phil who'd apparently been the hit of the party with his karaoke performance. My office was broken into, I said flatly. My bedroom was entered. Grandfather's desk is damaged. Oh, some kids were playing hide and seek, Ethan said dismissively. And that desk thing is probably just a water ring. It'll buff out. It's a cigarette burn and a knife scratch, I corrected him. It's a 200-year-old desk. Always so dramatic about things, my mother sighed. It's just stuff, Rachel. Just stuff. The words echoed in my head. To them. This house and everything in it was just stuff. Stuff they felt entitled to use, damage, and disregard because technically, we shared DNA. But to me, it was more than stuff. It was my sanctuary. My history, my private space that had been violated by the very people who should respect it most. I pulled out my phone and called my friend Hannah again. Can you come over? I need moral support. While waiting for Hannah, I walked through each room, taking photos of the damage. When she arrived, she gasped at the state of the house. This is worse than I imagined, she said, hugging me. What are you going to do? I looked around at the home I'd loved, now feeling tainted by disrespect. I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep pretending this is normal. After Hannah left, I made another call to Scott Reynolds, a real estate agent who had approached me several times about selling the property. The Victorian was in a prime location, and developers had been eyeing it since my grandfather's passing. Scott? It's Rachel Morgan. Remember that offer you mentioned last month? Is it still on the table? My mother and brother, who were in the kitchen discussing which relatives still needed rides to the airport, fell silent when they heard my side of the conversation. For the first time since I'd arrived home, I had their full attention. Scott arrived at my house within the hour, his normally slick real estate agent demeanor softening when he saw the state of the property. This is not how I remember the house looking during our previous discussions, he said tactfully, eyeing a stain on the entryway wallpaper. Family gathering, I said tersely. Let's talk in the garden. We sat at the wrought iron table on my patio, the only area relatively unscathed from the reunion chaos. Scott opened his portfolio and got straight to business, which I appreciated. The cash buyer I mentioned before is still very interested. Victor Zhang, tech entrepreneur who just relocated from California. He's been looking for a historic property in this neighborhood specifically. What's his timeline? I asked. He's motivated. currently in a short-term rental and wants to settle quickly. He can close as fast as your side can handle the paperwork. And he understands it's as is? I won't be making repairs or improvements. Scott nodded. At this price point and in this market, he's buying for the location and historical value. He plans to renovate anyway. I took a deep breath. What's his offer? $2.1 million, cash. Slightly below market value for the expedited timeline, but no inspection contingencies, no financing delays. I nodded slowly, a strange calm settling over me. I want to move forward. Scott tried to contain his surprise and excitement. Are you sure? This is a significant decision. The house has been in your family for generations. I'm aware of its history. That's precisely why I'm making this decision. I looked toward the kitchen window where I could see my mother and brother in animated conversation, likely speculating about my meeting with Scott. How quickly can we draw up the paperwork? I can have preliminary documents ready this afternoon. The full contract by end of day. If the buyer agrees to expedite his side, we could potentially close within days rather than weeks. Perfect. And I'll need the services of a good real estate attorney to ensure everything is properly handled. Scott made a call. And by 2 p.m., my lawyer Diane Matthews arrived. I'd worked with her before on setting up my will and power of attorney documents. She was thorough and discreet, exactly what I needed. While Scott prepared the initial paperwork in my damaged study, Diane and I spoke privately in the garden. Are you certain about this, Rachel? A hasty sale often benefits the buyer more than the seller. I understand that, Diane. But my circumstances have changed and I need to move quickly. The price is fair enough considering the convenience of a cash deal and quick closing. She studied my face. This isn't like you. You're usually methodical about financial decisions. Sometimes clarity comes suddenly, I replied. I've realized this house has become more burden than blessing. By late afternoon, I had signed preliminary documents and authorized Scott to present the offer to Victor Zhang. My mother and brother had been suspiciously quiet, observing from a distance but not interfering. That changed when Scott left. What was that about? My mother demanded, entering the garden where I sat reviewing paperwork with Diane. Business, I replied simply. What kind of business requires a real estate agent at our family home? Her emphasis on "our" didn't escape me. I introduced Diane as my attorney, which immediately put my mother on alert. I'm selling the house, I said calmly. The buyer is prepared to close quickly. I'll need you both to remove your belongings by tomorrow evening. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came the explosion. You can't be serious, my mother finally spluttered. This is impulsive and ridiculous, even for you. Ethan stepped forward. Come on, Rachel. You're overreacting about the party. We said we're sorry. Neither of you has actually apologized, I pointed out. But this isn't about apologies anymore. This is about recognizing that some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. So you're punishing us by selling our family home? My mother's voice rose with indignation. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm making a decision about my property that makes sense for my life moving forward. We won't let you do this, Ethan threatened. Grandpa would never have wanted you to sell. Grandpa trusted me to make my own decisions. That's why he left the house to me, not to the family collectively. My mother switched tactics, her voice softening. Rachel, honey, you're upset. I understand. What we did was thoughtless. But selling your grandfather's house is a decision you'll regret forever. Let's all take some time to cool down. It was the same pattern I'd seen my entire life. Minimize, deflect, then pretend to compromise when those tactics failed. Not this time. The decision is made. Mom. I've signed the preliminary documents. Mr. Zhang has already verbally accepted the offer and is sending the signed contract back tonight. Diane, bless her, chose that moment to interject. Mrs. Morgan, the transaction is already in process. Your daughter has the legal right to sell her property. I suggest you respect her decision and focus on your arrangements for relocation." My mother turned to me, tears welling in her eyes. "Where are we supposed to go on such short notice?" The manipulation was so transparent, it almost made me laugh. "The same place you were living before you decided to move in here without asking, your apartment. The one I've been helping you pay for." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low and threatening. I could contest Grandpa's will. Say he was manipulated or not of sound mind. Diane answered before I could. "The deadline for contesting the will passed 18 months ago, Mr. Morgan. And I personally conducted the capacity assessment before your grandfather signed his will. It would be a frivolous claim." I spent the rest of the evening in methodical organization, packing the items that truly mattered to me: my grandfather's collection of first edition engineering books, family photos from happier times, the small wooden box of letters he'd written me throughout college. I carefully wrapped his pocket watch and the fountain pen he'd used to sign his final will. The desk would have to stay, too damaged now to transport safely without professional help and too painful to look at daily. Perhaps Victor Zhang would restore it. Or perhaps it would be replaced by something modern. Either way, I was learning that the memories attached to objects lived on even when the objects themselves changed hands. My mother made several more attempts to change my mind, alternating between guilt, anger, and sudden promises to do better in the future. Ethan fluctuated between threats and bargaining. I remained resolute, feeling a strange sense of peace despite the chaos around me. By midnight, my essential belongings were packed into my car. I'd booked an extended stay hotel until I could find a new place. As I prepared to leave for the night, I took one last walk through the house, not as a goodbye, but as a release. Each room held memories, but I realized the most important ones would travel with me. My mother stood in the foyer as I headed for the door, her final attempt at manipulation ready. "If you do this, Rachel, you're tearing apart this family." I turned to her with a sad smile. "Mom, you can't tear apart something that was never truly together." I slept more soundly in the hotel that night than I had in months. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I arrived at the house by 8 to find Victor Zhang and his assistant already waiting outside. Scott made the introductions. Victor was younger than I expected, perhaps early 40s, with a quiet confidence and thoughtful manner. He'd made his fortune in sustainable technology and was refreshingly straightforward. "I appreciate the expedited process, Ms. Morgan. I understand this is a significant property with family history. Please call me Rachel. And yes, it has history, but it's ready for a new chapter." We walked through the house together. I made no attempt to hide the damage from the reunion, and to his credit, Victor didn't flinch or try to renegotiate based on the condition. "The bones are magnificent," he commented, examining the original crown molding in the living room. "You can't build this kind of character anymore." In my grandfather's study, he paused at the damaged desk. "This is a shame." American Empire period. Yes, circa 1830. My grandfather cherished it. I know a restoration expert who specializes in period furniture. If you're not taking it with you, I'd like to have it properly repaired. That small gesture of respect for the house's history meant more than he could know. The walkthrough complete, we gathered in the dining room where Diane had set up the closing documents. The process was surprisingly simple for such a significant transaction: signatures, initials, more signatures. Scott beamed throughout, mentally calculating his commission. As we were reviewing the final documents, the front door burst open. My brother Ethan stormed in, followed by my mother. "Stop. This is a mistake," Ethan shouted, his face flushed with anger or perhaps alcohol. Victor and his assistant exchanged alarmed glances. Diane stepped forward, ever professional. "Mr. Morgan, this is a private real estate closing. If you're not a party to the transaction, I must ask you to leave." My mother pushed past Diane, addressing Victor directly. "This house has been in our family for generations. My daughter is making an emotional decision she'll regret. Surely as a businessman, You understand the importance of careful consideration. Victor looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. Mrs. Morgan, I respect family bonds deeply, but I've entered into a legal contract with Rachel, who I understand is the sole owner of this property. Ethan moved closer, desperation in his eyes. Rachel, please. We can work this out. We'll respect your space. No more surprise parties. You can have whatever roles you want. For a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. These were the promises I'd wanted to hear yesterday, last week, last year. But I knew they were empty, offered only when something was being taken away, not out of genuine respect for my boundaries. It's too late, Ethan. The decision is made. My mother played her final card. If you do this, you're destroying your grandfather's legacy. Is that what you want? I set down my pen and turned to face her fully. Grandpa's legacy isn't this house, Mom. It's the values he lived by and taught me: integrity, respect, self-reliance. He left me this house because he trusted my judgment. I'm using that judgment now. By throwing away your family, she countered, tears streaming down her face. No. By recognizing that family is supposed to support and respect each other, not exploit and dismiss each other. You've had countless opportunities to treat me as a valued family member. Instead, you've treated me as an inconvenience at best, a resource to use at worst. Ethan stepped forward, his tone threatening. If you do this, don't expect us to be there when you realize what a mistake you've made. I looked at my brother, the boy I'd helped with homework, the teenager whose bail I'd paid, the adult whose business ventures I'd funded. I felt a profound sadness, but also a strange relief. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Diane, ever practical, interrupted the family drama. If we could continue with the closing? Mr. Zhang has a tight schedule. My mother made one last emotional appeal, promising that things would be different. That she understood now how I felt, that we could start fresh. But her words rang hollow against the backdrop of decades of similar promises, all broken. I signed the final documents. Victor Zhang handed over a cashier's check for the down payment, with the remainder to be wired upon recording of the deed. We shook hands, and just like that, the house that had been in my family for 3 generations belonged to someone else. The moment was anticlimactic, no thunderclap, no dramatic music. Just the rustle of papers being gathered and the quiet click of briefcases closing. Victor approached me after the formalities were complete. I want you to know I'll honor the history of this home. It won't be torn down or fundamentally changed. Thank you. That means a lot. I handed him a set of keys, the same keys my grandfather had given me 2 years earlier. There's a hidden compartment in the library, behind the 3rd bookshelf from the left. My grandfather kept historical documents about the house there. You might find them interesting. He accepted the keys with a respectful nod. You're welcome to visit if you ever want to. That's kind, but I don't think I will. Some chapters need to stay closed. My mother and brother watched in stunned silence as I gathered my belongings. There were no goodbye hugs, no wishes for good luck in my new life. Just the heavy weight of choices made and consequences accepted. As I walked down the front path for the last time, I felt lighter with each step. The garden that had once brought me joy now reminded me only of disrespect. The walls that had witnessed my grandfather's lessons now echoed with the sounds of a party I hadn't been invited to. I placed the last box in my car and looked back one final time. My mother stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. My brother was nowhere to be seen. I raised my hand in a small wave, then got in my car and drove away from the house, the check for $2.1 million in my purse, and an uncertain but unencumbered future ahead of me. The first week after selling the house passed in a blur of practical matters. I moved from the extended stay hotel to a furnished apartment with a 6-month lease, giving myself time to decide where I wanted to settle permanently. I opened a new investment account for the majority of the proceeds, set aside funds for taxes, and tried to adjust to my new reality. The silence from my family was both expected and jarring. No calls, no texts, not even angry voicemails. It was as if I'd ceased to exist in their world the moment I signed those closing documents. Part of me was relieved to avoid the drama, but another part ached for the family I wished I had, one that would have acknowledged the pain they caused and genuinely sought reconciliation. That silence broke on day 9 when my social media accounts suddenly flooded with messages from extended family members. Cousins I barely knew, great-aunts I hadn't seen in years, all expressing their shock and disappointment in my selfish decision to rob the family of its heritage. The stories they'd been told were predictably one-sided. According to the family grapevine, I'd had a tantrum over a harmless family gathering and impulsively sold our communal heritage out of spite. No mention of the uninvited use of my home, the damage to irreplaceable items, or the years of disrespect that had led to my breaking point. I didn't bother responding to most messages, but I did answer my cousin Melissa, who had always been kind to me. Her message was more measured than the others, asking genuinely if I was okay. "I'm doing fine," I wrote back. "There's more to the story than you've probably heard, but I'm at peace with my decision. I hope you and your family are well." Her response surprised me. I figured there was more to it. "Your mom and Ethan have always had a different version of reality. For what it's worth, I think Grandpa Maxwell would understand. He never let anyone walk over him either." That small validation from someone who had known my grandfather meant more than she could realize. At work, I threw myself into the success of the Helvetica banking system's implementation. My team noticed my renewed focus and energy. Hannah observed during our weekly lunch that I seemed lighter somehow, despite everything. "I feel lighter," I admitted. I didn't realize how much emotional weight that house carried, not just the good memories of Grandpa, but the constant struggle with Mom and Ethan. Now when I come home, it's just my space. No history, no expectations, no disappointment. "Have you heard from them at all?" Hannah asked. "Not directly. I've heard through the family rumor mill that they had to move back to Mom's apartment. Apparently, they'd started moving things into the house, assuming they could stay indefinitely." Hannah shook her head. The audacity. What did they think would happen? They thought I'd continue tolerating whatever they dished out, like I always have. 2 weeks after the sale, I received an email from Victor Jung with photos of the restoration work beginning on my grandfather's desk. "The craftsman believes he can repair the damage completely," he wrote. "When it's finished, would you like to have it? It seems to hold special meaning for you." His unexpected kindness brought tears to my eyes. I declined the offer. The desk belonged with the house, but his recognition of its significance was healing in a way I hadn't anticipated. That same evening, I was cooking dinner in my new apartment when my doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw my mother standing in the hallway, her appearance disheveled in a way I'd never seen before. Her normally perfect hair was unstyled, her clothes wrinkled. She'd been crying. My first instinct was not to answer, to protect the peace I'd been cultivating. But something, perhaps my grandfather's voice in my head, reminding me about integrity, made me open the door. "Mom," I said simply, neither inviting her in nor sending her away. "Rachel." Her voice cracked on my name. "Can I please come in? Just to talk." I hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered cautiously, as if expecting to be ejected at any moment. My apartment was modest compared to the Victorian, a simple 2-bedroom with standard fixtures and builder-grade finishes. Nothing special, but mine. Completely mine. "It's nice," she offered, looking around. "Cozy. What do you want, Mom?" I asked, too tired for small talk. She sank onto my couch, suddenly looking every one of her 62 years. "We've been evicted from my apartment. The landlord found out Ethan was living there when the lease specifically prohibited additional occupants." Of course, she hadn't come to reconcile but to seek help, financial help, most likely. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Where are you staying now?" "A motel." Temporarily. It's not ideal. Ethan is looking for work, but you know how that goes. I didn't know. My brother's employment history was a series of enthusiastic starts and abrupt departures. What about your savings? I asked, though I suspected the answer. Used for the reunion, she admitted, not meeting my eyes. And some for Ethan's latest business idea, a specialty coffee shop. The location fell through. The admission hung in the air between us. My mother had spent her savings on a party I wasn't invited to and another of my brother's doomed ventures. How much do you need? I asked, cutting to the chase. She looked up, hope flashing across her face. Just enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a new place. 3,000? Maybe 4? I'll pay you back, of course. The familiar pattern presented itself, her crisis, my resources, promises of repayment that would never materialize. For a moment, I considered it. It would be easier than the alternative. I had the money, but then I thought about what my grandfather would say about enabling versus helping. I can't give you money, Mom. Her face fell. Rachel, we're about to be homeless. After everything I've done for you. I'm not saying I won't help, I interrupted. I'm saying I won't give you money. There's a difference. She looked confused. What difference? I won't enable the same patterns that got us here. But I will help you find resources, affordable housing options, employment counseling for Ethan. Maybe even financial planning services. We don't need counseling or services. We need a place to live. You need both, I said firmly. And if you're willing to accept the help I'm offering, help that might actually change things, then I'm here for you. But I won't just write a check that postpones the inevitable next crisis. She stood up, anger replacing desperation. So this is your revenge? Making us jump through hoops when you're sitting on millions? This isn't revenge, Mom. It's boundaries. Something I should have established long ago. Boundaries, she scoffed. Is that what your therapist calls abandoning your family when they need you? I took a deep breath. Yes, I am seeing a therapist. Because healthy people seek help when they need it. That's what I'm offering you, real help, not a temporary band-aid. She gathered her purse, heading for the door. Keep your help and your judgments. We'll manage without you like we always have. The irony of her statement, when she'd shown up specifically because they couldn't manage without me, wasn't lost on either of us. As she reached for the doorknob, I said quietly, the offer stands. Mom, when you're ready for real change, call me. She paused, her back to me, shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, might recognize the opportunity being presented. Instead, she opened the door and left without another word. I sat alone in my new apartment, the dinner I'd been preparing now cold on the stove. The encounter had been painful but clarifying. For the first time, I'd offered help with conditions designed to create actual change rather than perpetuate dependency. It wasn't what she wanted, but perhaps it was what she needed. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah, checking in. You okay? I thought about the question carefully before responding, getting there. One day at a time. And surprisingly, it was true. 6 months passed quickly. Spring turned to summer, summer to fall. My temporary apartment gave way to a cozy townhouse in a quieter neighborhood with a small but private garden where I planted tulips in memory of my grandfather. My career continued to flourish. The Helvetica project led to a promotion and expanded international responsibilities. The most significant changes, however, were internal. Weekly therapy sessions helped me recognize patterns I'd normalized throughout my life and develop healthier responses to conflict. I learned that establishing boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary. That helping others didn't have to mean sacrificing myself. After our confrontation in my apartment, my mother and I didn't speak for nearly 3 months. I heard through Melissa that she and Ethan had found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Ethan had taken a job at a local hardware store, not his dream position, but steady employment for the first time in years. When my mother finally called, Her tone was different, less entitled, more hesitant. Rachel? It's me. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere. Just to talk. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop midway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a table by the window where I could see her approach. She looked older, more subdued, but there was a dignity in her bearing that I hadn't seen before. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, hands wrapped around her cup for warmth. "I've been doing a lot of thinking." "About what?" I asked, cautious but open. "About everything. The house, the reunion, the way I've treated you." She took a deep breath. "I wasn't fair to you, Rachel. Not just with the party, but for years. I favored Ethan. I took you for granted. I resented your success instead of celebrating it." Her admission stunned me. Never in my life had I heard my mother acknowledge any wrongdoing, let alone a pattern of behavior. "What brought this on?" I asked. "Reality," she said with a sad smile. "When you have nothing, you start to see things clearly. And I had a good teacher in that department." "What do you mean?" "Your grandfather. After you sold the house, I was so angry I went to visit his grave too. I don't know, complained to him about you." She shook her head at the memory. "While I was there, I remembered something he always said to me when I was young. Beverly, life doesn't owe you anything. It's what you build with your own two hands that matters." She looked up at me, eyes glistening. "I realized I stopped building long ago. I just expected things to be given to me by your father, by my parents, by you. That's not the example I should have set for my children." The conversation wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, old patterns threatening to resurface. But there was also honesty that had been missing from our relationship for decades. "I can't change the past," she said as we prepared to leave. "But I'd like to try for a better future, if you're willing." I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. "I'm open to trying, Mom. One step at a time." Rebuilding trust is a slow process. We started with monthly dinners, just the two of us at first, eventually including Ethan when he demonstrated his own willingness to change. Our first holiday meal together was at a restaurant, neutral territory that didn't carry the weight of past conflicts. My relationship with my brother evolved more slowly. His resentment ran deeper, his entitlement more ingrained. But necessity had forced changes neither of us could have predicted. The hardware store job led to an interest in home repair. By the following spring, he had earned his contractor's license and started a small handyman business. "I like fixing things," he told me during a rare moment of vulnerability. "There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again." I didn't point out the metaphor. He'd find it in his own time. Not all family relationships could be salvaged. Some relatives chose to maintain their narrative of me as the selfish villain who destroyed the family legacy. I learned to make peace with their perception, understanding that I couldn't control how others viewed my choices. Instead, I focused on building my chosen family, friends who respected my boundaries, colleagues who valued my contributions, neighbors who became confidants. Hannah remained my steadfast supporter, and I expanded my circle to include people who brought positivity into my life. 6 months turned into a year. I received an unexpected email from Victor Zhang with photos of the completed house restoration. He'd preserved the historical character while modernizing the infrastructure. My grandfather's desk held a place of honor in the study, fully restored. The garden had been replanted according to historical designs, including a tulip pattern that spelled onward when viewed from above. "Your grandfather's legacy lives on," he wrote. Different, but honored. His words captured perfectly what I'd been trying to articulate about my own journey. My connection to my grandfather wasn't contained in wood and plaster, but in the values he'd instilled in me: integrity, self-respect, the courage to build something lasting. The house had been a symbol, important, but ultimately just a vessel. The true inheritance was the strength to make difficult choices, to value myself enough to establish boundaries, to recognize when letting go was the bravest option. On the anniversary of selling the house, I invited my mother and brother to dinner at my townhouse, the first time they'd visited my new home. The conversation was sometimes awkward, old habits occasionally surfacing. But there was also laughter, genuine interest in each other's lives, and a tentative foundation for something healthier than what we'd had before. As they prepared to leave, my mother paused in the doorway. "You know, I think your grandfather would be proud of you." "For selling his house?" I asked, surprised. "For having the courage to make hard choices." Maxwell never took the easy path either. Her words were the final piece of validation I hadn't realized I was still seeking. Later that evening, I sat in my small garden surrounded by blooming tulips, reflecting on the journey of the past year. I'd lost a house, but gained clarity. I'd enforced boundaries, but created space for genuine connection. I'd honored my grandfather's legacy not by clinging to a physical structure, but by embodying the principles he lived by. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but neither was it burdened by the weight of toxic patterns and unmet expectations. Each day brought new opportunities to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Some days were harder than others, but even the difficult moments felt honest in a way my previous life hadn't. I often think about that moment of decision, standing in my damaged home, surrounded by the aftermath of disrespect, choosing to let go rather than continue the cycle. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one for me. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is release what no longer serves us, even when that something is wrapped in the comfortable cloak of family tradition. If you're watching this and struggling with similar decisions, remember that boundaries aren't walls designed to keep others out. They're guidelines that teach others how to respectfully remain in your life. Your worth isn't determined by how much you're willing to tolerate, but by how much you're willing to respect yourself. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision for your own well-being that others didn't understand? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear right now. And if this resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the like button so others can find this message too. Remember, family is important, but so are you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to write your own, whatever that looks like for you.